Hi, I'm Kate Snow, the author of Fifth Grade Math with Confidence, and today I'm here to do a flip through for you of the program. You'll need 3 books. You'll need the instructor guide, and then 2 workbooks, Workbook Part A and Workbook Part B.
All right, let's get into these books. We'll take a look at the instructor guide first and then the student workbooks. So the instructor guide is set up very similar to the 3rd grade and 4th grade instructor guide. And the overall program is very similar. So if you've used 3rd and 4th grade, you'll find this very familiar. You'll start with a table of contents. It shows that your student will focus a lot on wrapping up whole number multiplication and division this year with some new mental math techniques and extending the algorithms to larger numbers. You'll also spend a lot of time on fractions, adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators, multiplying fractions, and even a gentle introduction to dividing fractions. There's also a lot of decimals in 5th grade, including multiplying and dividing whole decimals by whole numbers. And then sprinkled throughout are some other topics of volume, coordinate plane and line graphs, geometry, and data. There's a welcome letter here, and then you get into the introduction, which offers a really kind of deep description of what's happening in 5th grade math with confidence. I really encourage you to give it a read to make sure you understand how the book is set up and how the lessons work. A lot of good tips in here. I try to put a lot in here that I think is helpful for families, especially if you're new to teaching math. And so this also gets into pacing and checkpoints. Here's the list of things your child should know before they start 5th grade math with confidence, how you should know whether to stick with a lesson or unit or move on, tips on scheduling, and then also a little bit on developing independence in math. We'll talk about that more when we get to the student workbook. But in general, many 5th graders are ready to be a little bit more independent in math, but they still very much need an instructor right by their side. So 5th grade includes some new features to help your child be a little bit more independent, especially on the practice and review pages, and also help streamline your teaching. You'll also find the list of what you'll need here in the introduction, and it's very similar to what you needed for 4th grade. You'll need counters, you'll need plastic fraction bars and fraction circles. If you don't have those already, I do recommend getting them. They're very helpful for understanding all the multiplication, division, and fraction concepts that your child will study this year. You'll use base 10 blocks and play money a bit this year, but not as much as in previous grades. If you don't already own base 10 blocks and play money, you might just want to use the Blackline master versions at the back of the book. You'll also need 30 centimeter cubes if you don't own base 10 blocks. These are just the unit blocks from base 10 blocks. They're cubes that are 1 centimeter on each side, and you'll use them for finding volume. And then beyond that, you'll need a ruler, protractor, playing cards and dice, some blank paper and pencils, a highlighter, and a plastic page protector and dry erase marker. So that's just the basic things that you want to have in your math kit. And then occasionally you'll need some other supplies, and they're pointed out in a few different places in the book. So after the introduction, you'll find the overview for Unit 1. Every unit begins like this with an overview of what your child will learn, the objectives that they will learn, a list of the lessons, and then any extra materials you need. There's also a feature called Teaching Math with Confidence with a short essay about how to help your child learn math. This one in the beginning is about how to teach your child to read math text and learn from printed examples, because you'll see that they form a more important part of 5th grade than they were in the 4th grade book. And I'll show you that here in lesson 1.1. So each lesson starts with a warm-up, and then there are several activities that you will use the lesson activities page in the student workbook to teach your child. So here in activity A, you review mental multiplication, and that's right here with part A in lesson 1.1. And as you can see, there's more printed text and examples here than in 4th grade. This is to help streamline your teaching, so you have these examples written out and you don't have to write them out yourself. And they also provide an example for your child to refer back to when he's doing the practice and review page later. And so these just help your child to have something to refer to so that he doesn't have to ask you quite so many questions as he's doing the practice page. And it also gets him used to studying math and learning from a textbook. Most kids in 5th grade and even 6th grade are not ready to really be learning math on their own from a textbook, but this gets them used to the idea of reading the textbook, studying the examples, and learning from a textbook for when they're a little bit older. So you'll use this text then to help teach part A, and then there's also a part B. Here you're creating a budget for a theme park vacation based on the number of people in your family, and that's what gets filled out here. And then after that, your child will do practice and review page to match this lesson. The practice is practice for the topic that he just studied, and then reviews previously learned skills. So getting back here into the instructor guide, these 2 activities are scripted to help you use the lesson activities page, and then there's the directions to do that independent practice and review. And you don't have to read this instructor guide word for word, but I do recommend keeping it open right next to you as you're using those lesson activities pages. The script often points out questions that dive deeper than what is printed on the page. It often helps, there's questions to prompt your child to think more deeply about the concepts, whereas the text on the student workbook is often just sort of the steps or the procedures needed to perform the operation. So make sure you're using this right alongside the student workbook, even if you don't read it exactly word for word. And then I'll also just point out a few other features here. One is that these gray rectangular boxes often provide notes about the text, an explanation of why the lesson is set up the way it is, or options to modify it to fit your child. Especially there's often options to add manipulatives if they're not already in the lesson. And then there's games throughout the book, just like in 4th grade. And so here, for example, is multiplication war, and that gray box indicates the directions for the games. And so now I'm just going to skip through this a little bit more quickly, get to the end of Unit 1. Each unit ends with an enrichment lesson, just like in 4th grade. You'll review memory work, and then like I said before, instead of having a series of math picture books over the course of the year, you use the book How Many Guinea Pigs Can Fit on a Plane? This is a very fun, very sweet book that uses lots of different real-life questions and examples to explore multiplication, division, measurement, fractions, and more. It really fits well with 5th grade topics. So you'll find a few pages listed here in every enrichment lesson to read with your child from that book. And that also, again, gives you a chance to make things a little more independent for your child. It's easier for your child to go off and read those on her own, and keeps you from having to get a new picture book each week. I found that there weren't as many great picture books for older students, so I decided to pick one really great book for the whole year instead. And then there's also an enrichment activity here that's fully optional, up to you whether you want to do it, but a lot of kids find these a lot of fun. And so in lesson 1.1, there was creating a budget for a vacation. And then here in this enrichment activity, you kind of design your own vacation and then use multiplication to estimate what the cost of that trip might look like. Then at the end of each unit is the answer key for all the practice and review pages in that unit, as well as a checkpoint that says what you should expect at the end of Unit 1 and whether or not your child is ready to move on. In general, Math with Confidence expects that your child will have a good start with the topics in a unit when you've completed it, but it doesn't mean, I don't expect that they have fully mastered every skill in that unit before moving on to the next one. So this will tell you whether or not your child is ready. And the review pages, they'll continue to review these topics and skills throughout the review pages, and often kids need another few weeks with a skill before they've fully mastered it. So don't be surprised if you often find that, some of the skills that your child hasn't quite mastered, that this tells you it's okay to move on. They'll keep practicing it, and within a few weeks you might be really surprised at how much more mastery they have after a little bit more practice in the review pages. All right, and so the units continue in that same format. So I'm just going to kind of skip through here to the back of the book and show you some of the features in the back. And So let's see, Unit 16 is the final unit. And then in the back of the book are some helpful Blackline masters that I want to make sure you know about. First of all of the memory work questions are listed here in the back of the book. So you have them all in one place. There's both review memory work and new memory work scattered throughout the year. And then there's also, this is the full scope and sequence. This lists all the objectives from every unit overview. So it's helpful if you want a more fine-grained list of what your child will learn in the book. Take a look here. This can also be helpful if you need to submit information to an evaluator or in a state report about what you're teaching your child. You can just grab it out of here of what they're learning in math this year. There's also materials list. This is the same list as you saw in the introduction with what you'll need in your math kit. And then these are the other supplies that are occasionally used throughout the program. All the ones with stars are from the optional enrichment lessons. And so you can see that most of the other things are very simple, like an extra die or 3 small boxes, a measuring tape, things you can just grab right before the lesson. There's also Blackline masters at the end of the book, and I especially want to point out that you don't have to rip these out. I know a lot of people don't like to rip their books or cut them. You can download them all here at welltrainedmind.com/MWC. And there's a few that you might use throughout the year. The memory work Blackline master, it's often nice to have that posted somewhere so that your child can see it. But then the rest of them are used only for a few times or they're optional. So this is that memory work Blackline master that is really helpful to have posted somewhere so your child gets comfortable with all this vocab. There's a multiplication assessment and directions in the book for how to give it, as well as multiplication review games and a multiplication chart. Decimal cards that are used to play a game, some decimal place value tools. These are those fraction bars that are you can either have plastic ones or you can use this Blackline master. Fraction cards. And then there's some geometry Blackline masters that you'll use for just a couple lessons. So that is the instructor guide, and now we'll take a look at the student workbook. So there are 2 student workbooks for 5th grade. Student Workbook Part A covers units 1 through 7, and then Part B covers units 8 through 16. You'll need both of the books to teach the whole year. So as I mentioned before, you'll see that there's a lot more of text on the page and printed examples for kids to use as they are learning these lessons. And so you'll use these then as the basis for teaching the lessons, but your child is not expected to do the lesson activities page on his or her own. And so, for example, you can see here that the 2 heads on this lesson activities page indicates that this is a page that you do with your child. And then the practice and review, they each have 1 head. They indicate that those are for your child to do on their own. So Unit 1 covers a lot of order of operations and parentheses and some review. Unit 2 moves into place value with larger numbers, and then does a lot of review with decimals as well as mental addition and subtraction with decimals. Comparing decimals, and as well as extending decimals to the thousands place. Unit 3 focuses on multiplication, finding multiples, reviewing the 2 ways to find answers, the box method and the algorithm for multiplication, as well as exploring some new properties like the associative property for new mental multiplication techniques, and then extending the multiplication algorithm to numbers with larger digits. There aren't too many of those because they're pretty exhausting, but we do get up to 3-digit times 3-digit or 4-digit times 2-digit so that your child knows how to do those operations. Unit 4 is a brand new topic, volume, and this is where you'll use those centimeter cubes to build solids like this and to find their volume. You can see that there's more explanation here that you'll read with your child as you're exploring these concepts, as well as the formula for volume. You'll see some formulas throughout this book. And then we'll explore different parts of formula, finding missing dimensions, breaking solids into two parts and finding their volumes and adding them, as well as some real-life applications of formula. Then in Unit 5, your child will review fractions and learn how to add and subtract fractions and mixed numbers with different denominators. So there's some review first of equivalent fractions, mixed numbers, and then getting into how to use common denominators. And in this unit, you'll want to use those fraction bars and fraction circles since they're very helpful for illustrating this concept of converting the denominators so that they have common denominators. Then in Unit 6, we get into division. This is mental division as for this unit, as well as learning the divisibility rules to how to know whether a number is divisible by 2, 5, 10, or 3, and 6, and by 4. And you'll see throughout the book there's quite a few games. A lot of them are two-person games similar to the ones that your child solved or that you played with your child in earlier grades, but there's also some one-player games here in 5th grade math so that your child has a chance to do some games on their own and to be more independent with them. You also find more riddles. The pilot test kids really loved these, where they have usually jokes where you find the answer and then write it in here to find the answer to the riddle. And so here we are reviewing long division in Unit 7. And this is a example of a unit wrap-up here. This is 2 pages at the end of each unit where your child will review, and you can use this to assess how well your child learned the information in that unit. So those are at the end of every unit. And then at the end of the book here, it's a summary of these text boxes, or the teaching boxes that are throughout the workbook. And so this provides a reference section for your child so that when they're doing the review pages, they can come here. If they forget, say, the formula for area and volume, so that they want to remember that base area times height equals volume, they can come back to the volume section and check out that formula instead of coming to find you. So they're meant here to help your child develop more independence while they're filling out their review pages. So that all of this is right here in one section at the back of the book. So that's book Part A, the Student Workbook Part A, and now we'll take a look at Student Workbook Part B. So Workbook Part A involved new concepts, but also a lot of review and extension of the concepts that your child studied in 4th grade Math with Confidence. Part B starts to go deeper into a lot of brand new topics, especially related to fractions and decimals. So in Unit 8, we start here with finding fractions of sets. And more practice with simplifying fractions and finding equivalent fractions. And then also using units of measure to represent using fractions to represent units of measure. We also begin to find a fraction of a set, like 1/4 of 12 or 1/9 of 9. And find parts of units to take fractions of units and convert them to the smaller unit. Your child will also begin to use bar models to solve these problems here in Unit 8. Often these are a little bit tricky for kids when they first start using them, but they become a really wonderful tool for solving problems with fractions, decimals, and percents throughout 5th grade and then into 6th grade. And so they help kids to visualize the part, the whole, and the fraction for these questions. And so Unit 8 does lots of different kinds of questions involving fractions of sets. And then in Unit 9, your child will study something brand new, the coordinate plane. And so your child will learn how to graph points on the coordinate plane, just using positive numbers only for this year. And then your child will also study slope in a very informal way and begin to study line graphs, and even use real-life situations to draw line graphs and represent relationships on the coordinate plane. This is a pre-algebra of kids starting to think about those sorts of relationships. Then in Unit 10, we get into multiplication of fractions. We start with something very simple, dividing up leftover cake, and then make the connection to multiplication. Your child will learn how to find a fraction of a fraction, like half of a 3/5 kilometer long trail, and how to take the numbers out of word problems and make them into fraction multiplication problems. This is a really challenging topic. Fraction, multiplication, division are some of the hardest upper elementary topics, and so we spend a lot of time making sure that this is very concrete, very visual, and so your child really understands what it means to multiply a fraction by a fraction. In Unit 11, then you take that a little further, and your child will learn how to multiply whole numbers and mixed numbers by fractions or mixed numbers. And so kind of pull together all of this fraction multiplication and mixed number skills that they have and put them together to multiply those mixed numbers, and do things, a lot of scaling recipes, and trying to I tried to include lots of real life applications so that it really makes sense what they're doing, that they're not just mindlessly going through the algorithm. And so there's lots of different applications of this in Unit 11, including finding area with fractions. And then here in Unit 12, we get into geometry. There's a brief review of angles, and then there's a lot of focus here on learning how to classify and measure angles and triangles and quadrilaterals. And so we find the missing angles in triangles, learn about equilateral, isosceles, and scalene triangles, review different kinds of quadrilaterals, and then also find missing angles in parallelograms and rhombuses. So after that break, nice geometry break, we took a break from fractions, we're back to fractions and getting into dividing fractions. This is, again, one of those topics that many children struggle with. It's very abstract, very hard for kids to sometimes understand what these questions actually mean. And so we'll use a lot of real situations like dividing up chocolate bars. We'll use those fraction circles to help your child understand what it means to divide 1/3 by 2, or what it means for three friends. If 3 friends are sharing half a pack of candy, how to translate that into a division equation and then find the answer. And so this year, your child will get mostly just kind of it's a gentle introduction to fraction division, and then we'll go deeper in 6th grade. And so here in Unit 14, now we'll get into decimals. Unit 14 focuses on reviewing decimals, learning some decimal vocabulary, and then multiplying decimals by whole numbers. As with whole numbers, we start with using place value thinking to do some mental math, and then get into extending the regular multiplication algorithm to decimals. Lots of focus here on using a place value chart to understand what it means to multiply a decimal by 10, and then extending that to convert metric measurements with by multiplying or by 10, 100, or 1,000. And then a little practice with the multiplication algorithm again. And then we get into dividing decimals by whole numbers. Again, starting with place value thinking and some mental math, dividing by 10, 100, or 1,000, and using that to convert measurements, and then finally using long division to divide decimals by whole numbers. And so these decimal activities not only strengthen your child's understanding of place value, but they also review the multiplication division algorithms in a new context. And then last here in Unit 16, we'll focus on data. Here we'll focus on finding the mean and median for 5th grade, and extending these to some more challenging situations than your child tackled in 4th grade. So for example, we can use the mean to find a missing value in a data set. And there's some analysis of how the mean and median are related to each other through a really fun hands-on activity, or foot on, I guess, where your child will balance on one foot with their eyes closed, find the mean and median, and then compare that to some other hypothetical measurements. The unit wrap up here is in the middle of this unit because then the book ends with some review lessons to review what your child has learned over the course of 5th grade and to celebrate what your child has learned. And then at the end, there is an award certificate here to congratulate your child on successfully completing 5th grade math with confidence. But don't forget that behind that is the unit reference pages that your child can use throughout the book to go back and refresh her memory on anything she's forgotten and use these to help complete the review pages. So I hope you have a wonderful year of using 5th grade math with confidence and wishing you all the best with it. Happy math.